My daughter-in-law screamed in front of 200 wedding guests. "What are you doing here? We told you not to come." I walked out without saying a single word, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. 20 minutes later, I was in the parking lot canceling every wedding payment from my phone. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. You should have seen the chaos through those pristine glass doors. The catering staff started packing up mid-service when their payments got declined. The wedding cake stayed half-cut because the baker's check bounced faster than a bad joke. The DJ stopped mid-song, leaving everyone frozen on the dance floor like statues in a very expensive museum. The florist arrived to collect her arrangements while guests were still eating appetizers. The photographer packed up his equipment during the first dance. 200 confused people watched vendor after vendor pack up and leave, while David ran around like a chicken with its head cut off. Sarah stood in her $4,000 dress. And yes, I know the exact price because I was supposed to fund this circus. Watching her perfect day dissolve like sugar in acid rain. Her mouth hung open in shock. Probably the first genuine expression I'd seen from her in 8 months. "Mom, what did you do?" David caught up to me in the parking lot, his face redder than a lobster at a seafood buffet. "I stopped financing fraud, sweetheart," I said, not looking up from my phone as I canceled the photographer's final payment. "You destroyed my wedding." "No, David, I saved your inheritance from professional thieves." "How did I end up in this nightmare?" I muttered, watching the last bewildered guests drive away. The answer took me back 8 months, to the first time David brought Sarah Morrison home. The first time I looked at my son's girlfriend and thought, this woman's story has more holes than a golf course. It all began with tiny inconsistencies, details that most people would dismiss as nervousness or privacy preferences. But when you've survived decades of life's curveballs, you develop a radar for people who aren't quite what they seem. The difference between intuition and paranoia, as it turns out, can save you everything you own. 8 months ago, I was Margaret Chen, retired bookkeeper and worried mother. Today, I'm Margaret Chen, wedding saboteur and family protector. Let me tell you exactly how Sunday dinner turned into financial warfare. Because, honey, this story is just getting warmed up. 8 months earlier, David arrived at my door grinning like he'd won the lottery. My 32-year-old son had never been what romance novels would call a heartthrob. He was sweet, intelligent, and had the dating confidence of a teenager asking someone to prom. So when he announced he was bringing someone special to Sunday dinner, I was genuinely thrilled. My baby boy had found love. "Her name's Sarah Morrison," he said, practically vibrating with excitement. "We've been talking online for 2 months, and Mom, she's incredible, beautiful, smart, and she actually seems to like me." The way he said that last part made my heart ache. David had always struggled with self-confidence, especially around women. He was the kind of guy who practiced conversations in the mirror and got nervous ordering pizza from strangers. 2 months of online chatting? I asked. And now she's meeting the family? I know it sounds fast, but we have this amazing connection. You're going to love her. Famous last words of every man who's ever been played by a professional. Sarah arrived that Sunday looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover and into my middle-class neighborhood by mistake. Blonde hair styled to perfection, makeup that probably took longer to apply than I spent getting ready for church, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly utilities. "Mrs. Chen," she said in this breathy voice that reminded me of old Hollywood actresses, "it's such an honor to finally meet you. David speaks about you constantly." She handed me a bottle of wine that I later discovered retailed for $80. Who brings premium wine to a casual family dinner unless they're trying to make a very specific impression? "Please call me Margaret," I said, though something about how she pronounced my name, like she'd rehearsed it, made my teeth itch. But what really caught my attention was how much Sarah already knew about our family. She mentioned my late husband's military service, asked about David's accounting career, and even commented on our lovely, established neighborhood. "David mentioned these older homes must have appreciated significantly," she said while admiring my living room. "Properties in mature neighborhoods are such solid investments." When exactly had my son discussed real estate values with his 2-month online girlfriend? Enter Marcus, stage left. "Sorry, I'm running behind," he announced, walking through my front door like he'd been invited to family dinner his entire life. Traffic was absolutely brutal on the interstate. Marcus was supposedly Sarah's cousin, but they had about as much family resemblance as a cat and a motorcycle. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of smile that probably worked on bank tellers and grandmother types. His handshake lasted too long. His eye contact felt rehearsed. "Sarah's shared so many wonderful stories about your family," he said, studying the photos on my mantle like he was memorizing them. "Is this David's graduation from State University? Excellent business program there. Really prepares students for careers in financial management and investment strategy." David had graduated with an accounting degree, not financial management. And since when did Sarah's cousin know David's educational background? But the real warning bell rang during dinner. Marcus navigated my kitchen like he'd lived there for years. He offered to help serve and went directly to the correct cabinet for plates, the right drawer for silverware, like he'd studied my kitchen layout. "Marcus has such attention to detail," Sarah explained when I raised an eyebrow. "He's been invaluable helping us plan our future together." Future planning. After 8 weeks of internet dating, what followed was like watching a perfectly choreographed performance. Sarah asked textbook questions about David's childhood, laughed at all his stories with exactly the right timing, made appropriate comments about family memories. Meanwhile, Marcus somehow steered every conversation toward financial topics. "You know, David," Marcus said over my homemade apple pie, "Sarah mentioned you've been really disciplined about saving money. It's refreshing to meet someone your age who takes financial planning seriously." David practically glowed under the praise. "Well, I had good teachers. Mom drilled money management into me, and I inherited some funds from Dad's life insurance policy." Sarah's hand found David's arm immediately. "You're so fortunate to have such a strong support system. Family resources make such a difference when couples are building their life together." Bingo. Hidden behind expensive wine and perfect manners, the real purpose of this dinner revealed itself. Sarah wasn't just interested in David. She was conducting a financial audit of his assets. I watched my son beam with pride, completely oblivious to the fact that his girlfriend and her cousin had just executed a flawless interrogation about his inheritance. It was like watching a lamb walk into a butcher shop and compliment the decor. After they left, I sat in my kitchen staring at that $80 wine bottle, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe I couldn't accept that my son had found genuine happiness, but Marcus had known where I stored my good china without being told. And Sarah had steered dinner conversation toward David's inheritance within 2 hours of meeting me. Call it maternal instinct or old-fashioned suspicion, but something about this perfect couple stank worse than week-old fish. 2 days before the wedding, I'd reached my breaking point. 8 months of watching this performance had pushed me past caring about politeness or family harmony. I drove to David's apartment with a folder full of concerns, not evidence. I didn't have concrete proof yet, just a mother's intuition screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. David answered the door in his pajamas at 2 p.m., which told me everything about how seriously he was taking pre-wedding preparations. "Mom, what brings you here? We need to have a conversation," I said, pushing past him into the living room where Sarah was lounging on the couch in silk pajamas, typing on her laptop. "All 3 of us." Sarah looked up with those crystal blue eyes. "Margaret, what a delightful surprise. We were just handling some last-minute wedding logistics." I'll bet they were, probably calculating how much they could drain from David's accounts during their honeymoon. "Sit down," I told David, "both of you." I'd planned this conversation carefully, intending to be diplomatic and rational. Instead, 8 months of frustration erupted like a volcano. "Something is fundamentally wrong with this situation," I began, opening my folder. "Sarah, you claim your family values privacy, but there's zero trace of you anywhere before 6 months ago. Marcus appears from nowhere knowing intimate details about our family finances. You somehow knew about David's inheritance before I even mentioned the specific amounts." Sarah's face transformed into a masterpiece of wounded innocence. "Margaret, I'm confused. Are you suggesting something inappropriate?" "I'm saying your stories have more inconsistencies than a politician's campaign promises. Your employment history changes every time someone asks. Your social media vanished completely. Your supposed cousin knew the layout of my house after one visit." David looked like I'd announced I was joining a circus. "Mom, what are you talking about?" This is where Sarah proved she was either Oscar-worthy or professionally trained. Tears appeared in those perfect blue eyes, and her voice began trembling. "I was hoping to avoid this painful truth," she whispered. "My ex-husband was abusive, Margaret. Emotionally and financially devastating. He stalked me online, threatened my family, destroyed my credit rating. I had to erase my digital footprint and start completely over for my own safety." She reached for David's hand, like it was a lifeline. "Marcus knows about your family. Because I've shared how much I adore you all. When you're planning to marry someone, you naturally discuss their background, their relationships, their future security. David was already melting. I could see it happening, the shift from doubt to protective fury. As for financial discussions, Sarah continued, David and I have talked extensively about our future together, our combined resources, how we'll build our life. Engaged couples do that. Brilliant. Every concern I'd raised had a perfectly reasonable explanation, delivered with just enough emotion to make me look like a heartless monster for questioning her. Mom, David said quietly, this is really inappropriate, but I was past the point of caring about appropriateness. 8 months of watching this charade had driven me beyond reason. What about Marcus knowing where everything is in my kitchen? What about you mentioning David's forgotten investment account? Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. What investment account? David jumped in immediately. The one Dad established when I was in college. Remember? We discussed it weeks ago when we were planning our financial future. She nodded slowly. Oh, absolutely. Yes, you mentioned that during one of our planning sessions. Game, set, match. Sarah had anticipated every question, prepared every response, and made me look like a paranoid mother who couldn't accept her son's happiness. The room fell silent except for David's wall clock ticking like a countdown timer. Sarah sat there looking wounded and beautiful. David looked angry and protective, and I felt like the villain in my own family's story. I believe, David said carefully, that maybe you shouldn't attend the wedding. Those words hit me like a physical blow. David, no, Mom. This is exactly what Sarah was worried about. You're so determined to find problems that you're manufacturing them from nothing. Sarah placed a gentle hand on David's arm. David, she's your mother. We can't exclude her from our special day. Smooth as silk, playing the gracious bride while letting David deliver the punishment. Perhaps we just need some space, David continued. After the wedding, when emotions settle, we can discuss this rationally. But right now, you're being unfair to Sarah and disrespectful to our relationship. I looked at my son and saw a stranger. In 8 months, Sarah had completely turned him against his own mother. Fine, I said, gathering my useless folder. But David, when this house of cards collapses, remember that I tried to warn you. For just a moment, Sarah's perfect mask slipped, and I glimpsed something cold and calculating behind those innocent eyes. Then the wounded bride performance resumed. I hope someday you'll understand that I genuinely love your son, she called after me. I walked to my car knowing I'd just declared war on a professional who was infinitely better at this game than I was. But I'd been underestimated before, and I wasn't finished fighting yet. Standing in that parking lot after obliterating my son's wedding, watching vendors pack up and confused guests drive away, I felt like I'd just detonated a bomb in my own family. My phone rang within minutes. David, predictably. What the hell did you just do? His voice shook with rage and disbelief. I stopped funding a con job, I said, watching the wedding cake being wheeled back into the baker's truck. You humiliated us in front of everyone. Sarah is devastated. The vendors have left, and our wedding is completely destroyed. Your wedding was doomed the moment you decided to marry a professional fraud, sweetheart. I'm done, Mom. Completely done. Don't call me. Don't visit. Don't contact us. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. The line went dead. I sat in my car for another hour, watching the last bewildered guests leave the venue. Part of me wondered if I'd just committed the biggest mistake of my life. What if I was wrong? What if I'd just nuked my relationship with my only child over gut feelings and circumstantial evidence? Then I remembered Marcus navigating my kitchen like he'd lived there, and I drove home with my conscience intact. The following days were torture. David meant business about cutting contact. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts showed as delivered but never read. When I drove past his apartment, his car was never there. I'd protected him from financial disaster and lost him completely in the process. By Wednesday, I was second-guessing everything. Maybe I really was just a controlling mother who couldn't release her grip. Maybe Sarah genuinely loved David, and I'd destroyed their happiness over nothing more than suspicious behavior and paranoid theories. My salvation came in the form of Helen, my neighbor, arriving Thursday evening with a tuna casserole and neighborhood intelligence that would change everything. Oh, sweetie, she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she was preparing for a lengthy siege. The whole street's been buzzing about what happened at the wedding. You poor dear. I did what seemed necessary, I said, though doubt was eating me alive. Of course you did. That Sarah girl always struck me as too polished, too perfect. Helen paused dramatically. Speaking of that wedding, Something's been nagging at me for days. My ears perked up. Helen functioned as our neighborhood's informal surveillance network. If something was amiss, she'd notice. That Marcus character, Sarah's supposed cousin, I finally placed where I've seen him before. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. Where? The Patterson wedding last spring. Remember when Amy Patterson married that banker? Marcus was there, but he called himself Mike Cameron and claimed he was connected to the groom's family. My pulse accelerated. Are you certain it was the same person? Absolutely certain. Same face, same charm, same way of circulating through the crowd asking personal questions about people's careers and financial situations. At the time, I thought he was just being sociable, but looking back, Helen shook her head. He was definitely fishing for information about family assets. This was the validation I desperately needed that something was seriously wrong. Helen, do you remember anything else about his behavior that day? He seemed to know a lot about the groom's family business, but when I mentioned it to Amy's mother-in-law later, she said none of them had ever heard of Mike Cameron. They assumed he was someone's plus one who got confused about which side of the family he belonged to. I spent the rest of the evening wrestling with what to do. David wasn't accepting my calls, and I had no way to reach him. But I had Helen's testimony that Marcus used false identities at multiple weddings. Professional con artists don't work in isolation. They have systems, patterns, documented histories. If Marcus was using fake names at weddings, there had to be other victims, other families who'd been targeted. By Friday, I'd made a decision that would either vindicate my actions or confirm that I'd completely lost my mind. I was hiring a private investigator. Detective Johnson's office looked exactly like central casting would order for a PI. Cluttered desk, coffee-stained files, and the kind of weary cynicism that comes from witnessing too much human foolishness. So you want me to investigate your son's wife because her cousin uses different names at weddings? He asked, scanning my notes. I want you to investigate someone who appears at multiple weddings under false identities and somehow possesses intimate knowledge about families' financial situations despite supposedly just meeting them. Johnson leaned back, suddenly more engaged. Identity fraud at wedding events is more common than most people realize. These criminals target families during emotional, expensive celebrations when everyone's guard is down. He opened a fresh file. Give me 1 week. If this Marcus character is running a long-term con, there'll be a documented trail. 7 days. 1 week to either prove my suspicions or confirm that I'd become the unhinged mother-in-law who destroyed her son's marriage over paranoid delusions. Meanwhile, David maintained absolute radio silence. Each day without hearing from him felt like losing him all over again. I'd raised him alone after his father's death, worked double shifts to fund his education, celebrated every achievement, and supported him through every disappointment. Now I was the enemy because I'd tried to protect him from beautiful predators. But experience has taught me that being right when everyone thinks you're wrong is the loneliest feeling in the world, until that moment when the truth finally surfaces. And I had a strong feeling that moment was approaching fast. Detective Johnson called me exactly 7 days later, and his tone immediately told me I wasn't crazy. Mrs. Chen, you need to prepare yourself for this conversation. Your instincts were completely accurate. I gripped my kitchen table. How accurate. Marcus isn't just using fake names. He's operating a sophisticated romance fraud network with multiple identities and a 5-year documented history of targeting families exactly like yours. Relief flooded through me, immediately followed by terror for what this meant for David. Johnson continued. I found records spanning multiple states. Marcus Reed, that's his actual name, has been Michael Cameron, Mark Carlisle, Martin Chase, and at least 4 other identities. He researches wedding announcements, engagement photos, social media posts, anything that provides intelligence about families with substantial assets. What about Sarah? Sarah Morrison is actually Sandra Mitchell. She's been his partner throughout the entire operation. Mrs. Chen, these people are extremely sophisticated. I located 2 previous victims who agreed to speak with me. Johnson explained their methodology. Lightning-fast online romance, rapid engagement. Cousin Marcus appearing to help with wedding planning while gathering comprehensive financial intelligence. Then, immediately before or after the ceremony, they'd drain whatever accounts they could access and vanish. Robert Chen, no relation to you, different spelling, lost $80,000. They emptied his savings 2 days before his wedding and disappeared. He was too humiliated initially to report it. The second case was worse. James Walsh lost his complete inheritance, nearly $200,000. Sandra convinced him to consolidate everything into a high-yield account that Marcus recommended. The account existed, but they controlled it. I stared at the photographs Johnson had assembled. Marcus at various weddings, always impeccably dressed, always working someone's family member. In every image, he was clearly networking like a professional salesman. Did either victim recover their money? Robert got back about 30% through bank insurance. James recovered nothing. By the time he understood what happened, they'd moved to another state with new identities. My hands trembled. Detective Johnson, David has access to over $300,000 in various accounts, which makes him their ideal target. Mrs. Chen, you need to contact your son immediately. Based on their pattern and the disrupted wedding, they're probably accelerating their timeline. I tried calling David again. Voicemail, texting, no response. I even drove to his apartment. His car was gone. He won't take my calls, I told Johnson. He believes I'm the problem. Then we go to him directly. Sometimes people need to see evidence before they'll accept warnings. 20 minutes later, Johnson and I stood outside David's apartment building. His car was in the lot, which meant he was home and actively avoiding me. I rang his doorbell repeatedly. Movement inside, but no response. David, I know you're there. I have Detective Johnson with me, and we have critical information you need to hear. The door finally opened, but instead of my son, Sarah appeared. She looked different, less polished, more strained. The perfect facade was beginning to crack under pressure. Margaret, I suppose you're here to gloat about destroying our wedding. I'm here to prevent my son from losing everything he owns. Where is he? David doesn't want to see you. You've caused enough damage already. Detective Johnson stepped forward, displaying his badge. Ma'am, I'm investigating romance fraud and identity theft. We need to speak with David Chen immediately. Pure panic flashed across Sarah's face before she recovered her composure. I don't understand what you're suggesting. If you have questions about identity theft, perhaps you should investigate Margaret. She's been harassing us for months. Johnson pulled out his evidence folder. Actually, we're here to discuss Marcus Reed, also known as Michael Cameron, Mark Carlisle, and Martin Chase. We have documented proof of his criminal activities, and we believe David is a target. David appeared behind Sarah, looking exhausted and confused. What's happening? I held up Johnson's photographs. Your fiancé and her cousin are professional con artists, David. They've done this before, to multiple families. Detective Johnson has the evidence. David stared at the photos spread across his coffee table. Marcus at different weddings, using different names, working with Sarah to target young men with inheritance money. Sarah, he said quietly, who are Robert Chen and James Walsh? Sarah was already moving toward the bedroom. This is all fabricated, David. Your mother obviously paid someone to create false evidence. She's obsessed with destroying our relationship. But David was no longer listening to her. He was studying a photograph of Marcus shaking hands with James Walsh at what was clearly an engagement celebration. When was this taken? He asked Johnson. 18 months ago, 2 months before James Walsh lost his entire inheritance to a fraudulent investment account that Marcus recommended. The apartment fell silent, except for Sarah frantically packing in the bedroom. How much money do you have access to, son? Johnson asked gently. David's face drained of color. About $350,000, everything combined. Johnson nodded grimly. Exactly the kind of target they specialize in. David sat down heavily, finally understanding the scope of what he'd almost lost, and what I'd actually saved him from. David stared at Detective Johnson's evidence for several long minutes. I watched my son's expression cycle through disbelief, recognition, and finally horrifying comprehension as reality crashed over him. She knew about my investment account, he said quietly. The one I'd completely forgotten Dad established. How could she possibly know about that? Because she and Marcus are professionals, Johnson explained. They research their targets extensively before making initial contact. Sarah emerged from the bedroom with a packed suitcase, her composure perfectly restored. Even caught red-handed, she was still performing the role of wounded victim. David, we need to speak privately. Your mother has obviously manipulated this so-called detective into fabricating false evidence. But something fundamental had shifted in David. The blind trust was gone, replaced by the sharp analytical thinking that made him excellent at his accounting job. Sarah, explain why Marcus appears in all these photographs with different names at different weddings. Those could be anyone. The images are too blurry to verify identity. She sat beside him, reaching for his hand. Your mother is paying people to lie about us. Can't you see her desperation? Then call Marcus, David said suddenly. If this is all false, call him right now and put him on speaker. Sarah's hesitation lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. He's traveling for business. What business? Last week you said he worked construction. Another crack in her story. Sarah's eyes darted between David, me, and Detective Johnson, rapidly calculating her options. He has multiple income streams. Freelance work? You understand how unstable the economy is. David was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling him myself. David, please don't. You're upset. You're not thinking rationally. Let's go somewhere private and discuss this calmly. But David was dialing. We listened to the phone ring once, twice, 3 times before voicemail picked up. This is Marcus. Leave a message. David hung up and immediately tried again. Identical result. He's probably busy, Sarah said, but her voice had risen an octave. Busy with his construction job or his freelance work? David asked. Which version is true today, Sarah? The floodgates opened. 8 months of suppressed doubts suddenly had permission to surface. And why do you know so much about my family's finances? Mom's right. I never discussed half the things you somehow knew. Sarah stood abruptly. I can't continue this interrogation. Your mother has poisoned you against me with these ridiculous accusations. She headed for the door, but David blocked her path. Where are you going? To a hotel. I need space to process this attack on our relationship. What hotel? You've been living here for 3 weeks. Why would you suddenly need a hotel? The lies were unraveling faster than cheap thread. Sarah looked genuinely cornered, probably for the first time in years. David, let me explain everything. It's complicated, but I can make you understand if you just give me an opportunity. Then explain, right now, in front of my mother and Detective Johnson. Sarah looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. 8 months of careful manipulation destroyed by one suspicious mother and a private investigator. Fine. You want truth? Her voice had changed completely, colder, sharper. Marcus isn't my cousin. He's my business partner. What kind of business? We provide financial consulting services to couples during major life transitions like marriage. Even in confession, she was still attempting to legitimize it. Show me, David demanded. Show me your business license, your client references, anything that proves this is legitimate. Sarah picked up her suitcase. I don't have to prove anything to someone who doesn't trust me. Actually, Detective Johnson interjected, you do have to prove it, because we have 2 documented victims who lost their life savings to your financial consulting services. Sarah's mask finally shattered completely. The tears stopped, the wounded act ended, and I saw the real person underneath, cold, calculating, and absolutely furious at being exposed. You have no idea what you're walking away from, she told David. A criminal who was planning to steal my inheritance? Someone who could have loved you when nobody else would. The final insult, wrapped in fake affection. David stepped back like she'd physically struck him. Get out, he said quietly. David, get out of my apartment, get out of my life, and stay away from my family. Sarah left without another word, but the look she gave me promised this was far from over. Detective Johnson began collecting his evidence. Mr. Chen, you need to contact your banks immediately and establish fraud alerts on all accounts. Change every password, review every recent transaction. David nodded, still in shock. Detective, what happens now? Now we build a case. With your testimony and our evidence, we should have arrest warrants within 48 hours. After Johnson left, David and I sat in his living room, surrounded by the debris of 8 months of deception. Mom, he said finally, I owe you an apology that could last the rest of my life. You don't owe me anything. You owe yourself a commitment to trust your instincts next time. But even as I hugged my son, I knew this wasn't finished. People like Sarah and Marcus don't simply disappear when their schemes fall apart. They escalate. 2 days later, Detective Johnson called with promising news. We have sufficient evidence for arrest warrants, he said. Identity fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft. The district attorney wants to move quickly before they flee the jurisdiction. How long before arrests? We're coordinating with other law enforcement agencies where they've operated, hopefully within 24 hours. But apparently, Sarah and Marcus had their own schedule. That afternoon, I was shopping for groceries when I literally collided with Sarah in the produce section. She was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, baseball cap. But there was something different about her energy. Less victim, more predator. Margaret, she said when our eyes met. What an interesting coincidence. Sarah, I tightened my grip on my shopping cart handle. I assumed you'd left town by now. Actually, I wanted to express my gratitude. I was completely unprepared for that response. Gratitude for what? For revealing exactly what kind of family David comes from. The suspicious, controlling kind that destroys anyone who tries to get close. Her voice was escalating, and other shoppers were beginning to notice our exchange. You obliterated a beautiful relationship because you couldn't tolerate the idea of your son loving someone more than he loves you. Now people were definitely watching. A teenage employee stocking lettuce had stopped to observe the drama unfolding. Sarah, lower your voice. Why? Embarrassed that people might hear the truth? She stepped closer, and I detected alcohol on her breath in the middle of the afternoon. You ruined my life because you're a bitter old woman who can't release her grip. This was escalating rapidly. I attempted to maneuver my cart around her, but she moved to block my path. David will never forgive you for this. You'll spend your remaining years alone because you couldn't stand to see him happy. Excuse me, I need to pass. Or what? You'll call your detective friend? Report me for grocery shopping while heartbroken? I pulled out my phone, and Sarah's expression shifted dramatically. Actually, that's exactly what I'm doing. Detective Johnson said he wanted to know about any contact you made. Fear flashed across Sarah's face before the angry performance resumed. You're calling police because I'm buying groceries? I'm calling them because you're harassing me in public and because there are active fraud warrants being processed with your name on them. Direct hit. Sarah stepped back, her face going pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Just like you don't know Robert Chen or James Walsh or any of the other families you've robbed. Other customers were maintaining distance now, but I could see phones appearing. This confrontation would be on social media within minutes. Sarah recognized this too. She abandoned her cart and moved toward the exit, but not before delivering one final threat. This isn't finished, Margaret. When David realizes what he's lost, when he's lonely and miserable, remember that you caused this. She walked away, leaving me standing in the produce section with my heart racing and hands trembling. I didn't actually call Detective Johnson from the store, but I contacted him immediately when I got home. She's still in town and she's angry, I reported, and she was drinking in the middle of the day. Concerning, but not unexpected. Desperate people make irrational decisions. Mrs. Chen, you should be extra cautious for the next few days. Maybe stay with your son, or have him stay with you. Do you think she's dangerous? I think she's about to lose everything she's worked for, and that makes people unpredictable. Better safe than sorry. I called David immediately and described the grocery store encounter. She threatened you? His voice sharpened with concern. More like promise that you'd regret choosing family over her. David, Detective Johnson thinks we should stick together until they're arrested. I'll pack a bag and come over tonight. Mom, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this because of my poor judgment. Your only mistake was trusting someone you thought you loved. That's not poor judgment. That's being human. That evening, David arrived with a suitcase and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. We spent the night reviewing his financial accounts, changing passwords, and examining every transaction from the past 8 months. Look at this, David said, pointing to his credit card statement. 3 charges yesterday that I didn't make. Sarah had gone on a revenge shopping spree, $500 at an electronics store, $300 at a designer boutique, and $200 at an upscale restaurant. She's using your credit card for spite purchases, I observed. Call the bank and report them as fraud. But as David was on hold with customer service, I couldn't shake the feeling that unauthorized credit card charges were just the opening act. If Sarah was desperate enough to use David's cards after being exposed, what else was she planning? And how long would she remain in town seeking revenge? The next morning, David's phone rang at 6 a.m. He'd returned to his apartment to collect more clothes and discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Mom, you need to get over here immediately, he said, his voice completely flat with shock. I threw on clothes and raced to David's place, my imagination conjuring worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I understood his stunned tone. David's apartment had been systematically searched. Not violently, this wasn't random vandalism. Every drawer had been methodically examined, every closet inspected, papers scattered across surfaces with surgical precision. They took my laptop, my backup drives, and every financial document I owned, David said, standing in the middle of the chaos. But they left the television, the stereo, even the cash I keep in my desk drawer. This wasn't theft. This was Sarah and Marcus, eliminating evidence and gathering intelligence. Have you called police? They're en route. But Mom, there's something else you need to see. David led me to his bedroom, where someone had used red lipstick to write a message across his bathroom mirror. You chose wrong. I stared at those words, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. This wasn't anger anymore. This was escalation into something more dangerous. Police arrived within 30 minutes, 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be handling anything other than relationship drama. "So your ex-fiancé broke into your apartment and stole your computer?" Officer Martinez summarized after taking statements. David nodded. "She had keys. We were cohabiting for 3 weeks before the wedding. What was on the computer that she might want?" The full scope of the violation hit me. Sarah hadn't just stolen David's laptop. She'd stolen his entire digital identity. "Everything," David said quietly. "Bank account information, investment records, tax returns going back years, photos, emails, my complete digital life." Officer Martinez exchanged a significant look with his partner. "Mr. Chen, you need to contact every financial institution immediately. This kind of identity theft can escalate very rapidly." After police left, David and I spent the morning implementing complete financial lockdown. Every account was frozen, pending new security verification. Every password was changed. Every automatic payment was canceled. "I feel like such a fool," David said, while on hold with his investment company. "I gave her access to everything. You trusted someone you thought you loved. That's human nature, not foolishness." But the call to his investment firm revealed how close we'd come to catastrophe. Someone had attempted to transfer funds that very morning, just hours after the break-in. "The transaction was blocked by our automatic fraud detection system," the representative explained. "But it would have processed within another hour if we hadn't frozen the account when we did." $47,000. Sarah had attempted to steal $47,000 from David's investment account. Detective Johnson called that afternoon with an update. "The break-in changes the entire situation," he said. "Computer theft, identity theft, attempted wire fraud. We now have enough for felony charges. Warrants should be issued tomorrow. What if they run before you can arrest them? It's a calculated risk, but Mrs. Chen, breaking into the victim's apartment suggests they're becoming desperate. Desperate people make critical mistakes." That evening, my neighbor Helen knocked on my door with news that made my stomach drop into my shoes. "Margaret, there's been a strange car parked across from your house since this morning. Dark sedan, tinted windows. The driver's been sitting there for hours." I peered through my window and felt my heart stop. A black sedan sat under the streetlight across the street, the driver's silhouette barely visible through tinted glass. "David," I called quietly, "come here." He joined me at the window, and we both recognized the figure in the driver's seat. "Marcus," David confirmed. "He's watching your house." We called police again, but by the time they arrived, 20 minutes later, the sedan had vanished. Officer Martinez took another report, though I could tell he thought we were being paranoid. "Could have been someone waiting to pick up a friend," he suggested without conviction. "For 8 hours?" Helen interjected. "I've been monitoring that car since noon." Neither David nor I slept well that night. Every car that drove down our quiet residential street sounded like potential threat. Every shadow in the yard could have been an intruder. At 3 a.m., I found David sitting at my kitchen table with a baseball bat across his lap. "I keep wondering what they might do next," he said. "If they're surveilling your house, if they broke into my apartment, what's their end game?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sarah and Marcus weren't just attempting to steal money anymore. They were trying to destroy our lives completely. And tomorrow, if Detective Johnson was correct, they would either be in custody or desperate enough to attempt something even worse. The next day, I decided I'd had enough of being hunted like prey in my own neighborhood. Sometimes when you're being stalked, the best strategy is offensive action. "I'm going to David's apartment," I announced over breakfast. "Mom, police said to stay away until they complete the investigation. Police finished yesterday. I want to see if they overlooked anything important." What I didn't tell David was that I hoped Sarah and Marcus would return. I wanted a confrontation on my terms, in a location where I could control the circumstances instead of being ambushed in grocery stores or watched from mysterious cars. I drove to David's building and convinced the superintendent to let me inside. Poor Mr. Rodriguez thought I was just a concerned mother checking on her son's place after a break-in. He had no idea he was facilitating what could optimistically be called a citizen's arrest. David's apartment still resembled a disaster zone. I spent an hour carefully searching through the wreckage, looking for anything the criminals might have missed during their frantic search. I found it wedged behind David's dresser, apparently dropped during the chaotic ransacking. A cell phone with a cracked screen and a distinctive case that definitely didn't belong to my son. I was examining the phone when I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside. My pulse spiked as I recognized Sarah's voice, arguing with someone about whether they should risk returning. "We need that phone," a male voice said. Marcus, obviously. There's too much incriminating information on it to leave behind. It's probably destroyed, or the police have it by now. We can't take that chance. If they access those contacts and messages, they were coming back, and I was about to be trapped in David's apartment with two increasingly desperate criminals. I looked around frantically for an escape route or hiding place. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, so windows weren't viable. The only concealment was David's bedroom closet, which felt like a terrible tactical choice. Then I heard keys jingling in the lock. Sarah still had David's spare key. I slipped into the bedroom and pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The building's thick walls had always been problematic for cellular service, and naturally they would fail me at the worst possible moment. The front door opened, and I heard footsteps entering the living room. "Christ, what a disaster," Marcus said. "Police really demolished this place. Just find the phone and let's get out of here." I crept to the bedroom doorway and peered out carefully. Sarah was systematically searching through debris in the living room, while Marcus checked the kitchen. Neither was looking toward the bedroom. The prudent thing would have been to remain hidden until they left. The safe thing would have been to slip out while they were distracted. Instead, I did something that was either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid. I stepped into the living room, holding the phone above my head, and said, "Looking for this?" Both criminals spun around like I'd fired a gunshot. Sarah went pale, but Marcus looked genuinely menacing for the first time since I'd known him. "Mrs. Chen," he said in a voice that had lost every trace of charm, "you really shouldn't be here." "Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you." Sarah found her voice first. "That's my phone. You have no right to take my property." "I have every right to secure evidence of your crimes," I replied, projecting more confidence than I felt. "Police are very interested in what they might find on here." Marcus started moving toward me slowly, like he was approaching a dangerous animal. "Why don't you just hand over the phone, and we'll all walk away from this?" "Because I don't negotiate with criminals." Sarah pulled out her own phone and started recording video. "Look, everyone," she announced in her victim voice. "This crazy woman broke into my fiancé's apartment and stole my personal phone. She's been stalking and harassing us for months. Even caught red-handed, she was still attempting to control the narrative through social media manipulation." "Turn off the camera, Sarah. It's Sandra," she said with a cold smile. "Sarah was just a character I played for your pathetic son." The mask was completely off now. No more wounded bride, no more innocent victim, just a professional criminal who was tired of pretending. "Turn off the camera, Sandra, or I'm calling police right now." "With what phone? You don't have signal in this building and we both know it." She was right, and her expression told me she knew it. I was trapped in an apartment with two criminals who had nothing left to lose, holding evidence they desperately needed to retrieve. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, still advancing. "You're going to give us that phone, and then you're going to forget you ever saw us here." "And if I don't?" Marcus smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it anymore. "Then this conversation becomes much more unpleasant for everyone involved." I backed toward the bedroom, clutching the phone like a weapon. These people had already committed identity theft, burglary, and attempted fraud. How much further were they willing to escalate? "You know what your problem is, Margaret," Sandra said, following me with the camera still recording. "You never learned when to quit." I was about to discover exactly how dangerous desperate criminals could become, and my phone still had no signal to call for help. Looking at Marcus and Sandra's faces, I realized I had two choices: panic like a helpless victim, or remember that I'd survived 72 years of life's curveballs and wasn't about to be intimidated by a couple of criminals having a bad day. "You want this phone?" I said, holding it up like a trophy. "Come and get it." Then I did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I hurled that phone as hard as I could at David's living room window. The glass exploded in a spectacular crash that probably woke up half the neighborhood. The phone bounced off the window frame and hit the floor, its screen completely destroyed beyond any hope of data recovery. "Oops," I said sweetly to their horrified expressions. "Clumsy me." Marcus lunged for the destroyed phone while Sandra screamed profanities that would make a construction worker blush. But the damage was done. Whatever incriminating information they'd needed was now digital debris scattered across David's carpet. "You insane old witch!" Sandra shrieked, abandoning all pretense of being a victim. "Language, dear. They're our neighbors." The shattered window had triggered building security alarms, and I could hear people moving in the hallways outside. Marcus grabbed Sandra's arm. "We need to leave. Now." They ran for the door, Sandra still hurling insults over her shoulder about how I'd ruined everything. Marcus paused just long enough to give me a look that promised this wasn't over. "See you around, Mrs. Chen." I sincerely hope not. They disappeared down the stairwell, leaving me alone with David's destroyed apartment and a growing crowd of concerned neighbors in the hallway. 20 minutes later, I was giving a statement to building security about the break-in when my phone finally rang. David, at last. "Mom, what the hell is happening? My neighbors are calling about police cars and broken windows. Your ex-fiancée and her criminal partner broke into your apartment. I caught them in the act. There was a confrontation, and they fled. Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. But David, you need to check your bank accounts immediately. They didn't return for sentimental reasons." 3 hours later, David called me from his apartment, his voice completely broken. "Mom, they cleaned me out. Everything. $312,000 gone." I drove to his place immediately and found my son sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen, showing zero balances across multiple accounts. "They transferred everything to offshore accounts at 3 a.m. while I was sleeping at your house. I woke up to find my life savings gone." I sat beside him and took his hand. "Money can be replaced, David. You can't. How did you see what I couldn't? How were you the only one who knew? Because I've lived long enough to know that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is." His phone rang suddenly. David looked at the screen and went pale. "It's Sarah." "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." David answered, and Sarah's voice filled the room. She was calling from what sounded like an airport terminal. "Thanks for the money, David," she said cheerfully. "You were useful, even if you were incredibly boring." The line went dead. We spent the rest of that morning at the police station, filing reports and providing Detective Johnson with everything we knew. The investigation was now officially a federal case involving wire fraud and interstate criminal activity. "We'll find them," Johnson promised. "People like this always make mistakes when they're running scared." But as we left the police station, I wondered if that was actually true. Sarah and Marcus seemed pretty experienced at disappearing. David moved back in with me that week, his confidence as shattered as his bank account. My successful, independent son was back in his childhood bedroom, trying to rebuild his life from nothing. "I'm such an idiot," he said over dinner. "How did I fall for this so completely? You fell in love with someone who was very good at pretending to love you back. That doesn't make you an idiot. It makes you human." But privately, I was furious. Not just at Sarah and Marcus, but at a system that allowed professional predators to destroy people's lives with such ease. My son deserved justice, and somehow I was going to make sure he got it. 3 weeks after David lost everything, Detective Johnson called with the news I'd been praying for. "We got them," he said simply. Sandra Mitchell was arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica using a fraudulent passport. I nearly dropped the phone in relief. What about Marcus? Marcus Reed was captured in Las Vegas, along with 2 other women who were part of their criminal network. Turns out he's been operating this romance scam operation for 5 years, targeting families across multiple states. David was at work, so I drove straight to his office to deliver the news personally. When I told him Sandra had been arrested, he actually started crying. "Does this mean I might recover my money?" Detective Johnson believes you'll get back about 70% through seized assets. It's not everything, but it's a foundation to rebuild on. The most satisfying moment came when Johnson called later that day. "Mrs. Chen, we're bringing Sandra back from Phoenix tomorrow. David might want to witness her being processed for closure." The next morning, David and I stood outside the federal courthouse, watching Sandra being led in handcuffs from a police transport van. She looked completely different. No makeup, orange jumpsuit, hair pulled back harshly. The beautiful mask was permanently gone. When she spotted David through the courthouse window, she started screaming, "Your son is an idiot anyway. He was boring in bed and pathetic in life." Even in custody, she was still trying to inflict emotional damage. But David just stood there watching her with an expression of profound relief. "You know what, Mom? I'm actually grateful this happened. Grateful. If I'd married her, if we'd had children, if I'd built a life with her, discovering the truth later would have been devastating beyond recovery." The federal investigation revealed that Marcus had been operating his romance scam network for 5 years, targeting middle-class families with inheritance money or substantial assets. They'd stolen over $2 million from 12 different victims across 8 states. David ultimately recovered about 70% of his stolen money through seized assets and recovered funds. Not everything, but enough to restart his life. Sandra was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, Marcus received 8 years because of his leadership role in the criminal organization. "Mom," David said one evening over dinner at my house, "I owe you an apology that could last the rest of my life. If you hadn't destroyed that wedding, if you hadn't been suspicious, you don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You owe yourself a promise to trust your instincts next time." Helen stopped by later that week with her usual casserole and neighborhood commentary. "I always knew something was wrong with that Marcus character," she declared. "Too charming, too interested in everyone's personal business. I should have spoken up sooner." "You did speak up, Helen. Your observation about seeing him at other weddings is what started the entire investigation." "Well, I'm just relieved we stopped those criminals before they hurt anyone else." 6 months later, David started dating again. A wonderful teacher named Lisa, who I actually met first at the farmer's market. When David mentioned he was single, I introduced them properly. "Promise me you'll let me meet anyone you're serious about," I told him after their 3rd date. "Actually, Mom, I was hoping you'd help me research her background first." I looked at my son, my careful, analytical, newly cautious son, and felt proud. "Now you're thinking clearly. Teach me what to look for. I never want to be that vulnerable again." 2 years later, David proposed to Lisa after a thorough 6-month courtship where I had plenty of time to verify that she was exactly who she claimed to be. They're getting married next spring, and this time, I'm paying for the wedding with joy instead of dread. Because sometimes the suspicious mother-in-law isn't the villain of the story. Sometimes she's the hero who saves the family from professional predators. And sometimes being paranoid is exactly what protects the people you love most. My neighbor Helen calls it my superpower. I call it being a mother who pays attention. Either way, it worked perfectly. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.